We Albertans have become incredibly rich as oil pushers. In fact, by the standards of anybody else in the world, we are wealthy beyond measure. When you think of all the people we heard about today, with whom we ought to have empathy, you look at our fortune and you wonder, does life get anywhere better than this? Because after all, we won the geological lottery, and we spend the way lottery winners always do. We're only 3.8 million people. We spend $110 million a day on our public sector governance. But what do we hear? Deep dissatisfaction with healthcare, deep dissatisfaction with education, deep dissatisfaction with the way our society is structured and our services are delivered. How do our complaints sound to that Arab Muslim in Iraq? To many of the people who are struggling everywhere else in the world for a simple vestige of what we have. But like all lottery winners, we don't even have a context in which to understand how privileged we are. And when people approach oil, our consumption of oil, our production of oil, like all pushers say to all addicts, it is a problem of consumption. If you'd consume less, we would be out of business and we wouldn't have to have anything to complain about. But you know what this does? We are not only producers and consumers. Everything we've heard today about the consumer society, about the fragmentation of community, about the unraveling of the human condition that happens when we are governed by consumption and are ourselves consumed, also finds resonance in our society. Because in all the work I've done as a consultant, the surveys we've done, the soundings we've taken, we Albertans are profoundly unhappy. We have no faith in our leaders. We feel we have no influence, and we aren't heard. And as we have heard from so many speakers today, as we know from our own experience as sentient, engaged, thinking, complex human beings, looking at what is happening in the world, we know we're not alone. We look at the Arab Spring uprising. We look at the deep discontent everywhere. We look at the simple yearning for connectivity and community and that missing strand of humanity that is our birthright as human beings, and we know it's not here. Let's look at some of the reasons why we're not alone. Let's look at 7 behaviors that are driving discontent all over the world. You will all come up with your own examples for this, and as these go up on the TEDx website in the weeks to come, you will have time to reflect, so I put them up for reflection. Wealth without work, the Wall Street crash, the culture of greed, the whole idea, the ethos of consuming without consequence, which leads us to pleasure without conscience. We take our pleasures where they find them, where we find them, as all privileged people do, as all wealthy people do. Do we really think about the consequences of taking pleasure? Knowledge without character. We learn a lot. We know a lot. Do we use it with reflection? Do we realize the potency of knowledge, of the transformative power it can have? Do we use it for the betterment of the common good of our biosphere? Do we use it for the increase of the commonwealth of the 7 billion humans on Earth to whom we are genetically connected through that first surviving mating pair of Homo sapiens 255,000 years ago, from which every single one of us is descended? Do we reflect on those bonds of blood and genetics? Then, to give ourselves succor, to give ourselves comfort, we worship. What sacrifice does it bring when we pray? Do we pray for the betterment of others or for the betterment of ourselves? Then there's the application of what we've learned and whether we apply it on a human scale to advance human principles, science without humanity. And as we know all too well, the widespread influence of commerce without morality. And underlying all of that, and all these global revolutions, and all these changes, and all these yearnings, we see politics without principle. Now, this is not original thinking on my part, nor is it particularly contemporary. These are the ills of the world that were identified in 1925 by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Here they are on the walls of Gandhi's ashram in Gujarat. 1925. How many wars have we come through since then? How much suffering have we come through since then? How much have we suffered because a culture of violence, a culture of greed, a culture of selfishness has supplanted our natural human instinct for a culture of love, for a culture of community, and a culture of caring. And we, as privileged Albertans, we, as owners of the world's largest oil resource, can do something about it, and Gandhi gave us the guiding principles. Understand the suffering of others. Give wing to the fallen. Abandon ego and pride, and serve the divinity within all. This is not a magic formula. This is not a transformation that takes billions of dollars or royal commissions or investments or governments. It is an internal process of transformation. It is realizing a profound empathy with the other. It is becoming the other. And it is understanding that on this planet, on this biosphere, we are one. So here today in the city of Calgary, I want to give you a means of getting there that may sound astonishingly radical, but as you reflect upon it, as you think about it, as you enact it, that I hope will become real. I believe that our way to that Gandhian transformation, to that quest, that yearning for community, not just locally but globally, can be solved if we can use our oil sands wealth to fund a green future for the world. All the oil sands wealth that we're stewards of, what is it for? Let's use it to fund a green future in the world. We're going to need a transformation to get there. It's not so much trying to be the best in the world. I think the better Alberta aspiration is to be the best for the world. The best for the world. So what does this best Alberta look like? Let's imagine Alberta with freedom from fear, because democracy should mean you're never afraid. Freedom from what? No one should go without in this amazingly rich community. Living together in community with dignity, in harmony with one another, and the natural world. A simple statement of principles, not difficult to achieve. And taken together, these amount to something else. This is what it means when you live human rights as a way of life. Not human rights as a code of law, but human rights as a way of life. Freedom from fear, freedom from want, living in community with dignity and harmony with one another and the natural world. This is the human condition. This is the human birthright. This is who we were born to be and who we were born to do. And we, the wealthy privileged here, have the capacity and the ability, starting with all 100 of you here today, to lead this transformation. How do we go about it? We know that our planet needs greener energy. We've seen it on the lab scale, we've seen it on the development bench, and we know it needs a lot of money to get there. We also know the hydrocarbons we produce are branded as the dirtiest oil on the planet. So we have $15 trillion worth of oil sands wealth. That's calculated on what's recoverable with today's technology at $75 a barrel. Let's use it to spend the $200 to $300 billion necessary to get those sustainability resources out of the lab and into the ground. Before he was disgraced, Dominique Strauss-Kahn reckoned it would take about $100 billion to bring global social equity in terms of helping countries mitigate against climate change, another $200 billion to build renewable resources so that people could aspire simply to a better life. Because if everybody on the planet had a half of the standard of living we do, we would need 5 planets worth of resources, and we have only one. So what do we fund? Greener oil sands, cleaner coal, alternative energy. These are all well known. Bioenergy, bioeconomy. With all of this, we can only do it if we make a conscious, collective, societal decision that we are going to use our oil sands wealth to fund the green future, because we know that if we do so, we can prove and demonstrate that fossil fuels and alternative energy actually complement one another. And I want to throw out a challenge to you as self-identified leaders and influentials who apply to come to a TEDx event, who are going to leave here and want to know how to act. I know you're going to have to find the answers yourselves, but inspire others, because it's really about leadership and our citizens. We all have to be part of the design of how we get there. And we know that environment and economy is one issue. We know that Canada, uniquely among the petrostates in the world, is the only energy superpower with an obligation of environmental stewardship. Right now, in recoverable reserves, we have the second largest oil deposits in the world that are recoverable. Within 5 years, we'll be number one. We will be the largest petrostate in the world, and when you look down that list of all the other petrostates, we are the only democratic state among them. And that gives us a special obligation and responsibility. So how do we get there? I'm going to put 3 ideas out there, which I think are key transformative areas we can work on. The first is the bioeconomy. The bioeconomy is the value of the sugars and starches that are in our plants and crops. We've had government scientists in Alberta tell us that this is a $1 trillion economy waiting to happen. It's going to be a zero waste economy, because everything is used optimally. We can do an amazing and astonishing range and variety of things with the bioeconomy. This will unleash a tidal wave of economic empowerment for the world. My friend Evan Krapko, who's a pioneer in the bioeconomy, has signed contracts in places like Shanghai and Karachi to turn garbage and animal excreta into electricity. Needs more money to do it better. That's a made in Alberta technology. That's hope for the future. The nano economy. This is again a transformative catalytic force in the world. This is something that's waiting to happen. It's going to take leadership. We have the National Institute of Nanotechnology in Alberta. We need to make the investment. We need to take this leadership. But most importantly of all, it is the aspirations we have for our society. The culture of human rights. Human rights as a way of life. We need to be that model. We need to be the designers and deliverers of that preferred future, simply because we have the power, the capacity, the wealth, the population, and engaged citizenship to do so. If we can show how we can be a best practices model in literacy and connectivity and community and diversity and inclusion, we will be able to project a very different idea of who we are. Let me now put that in the context of a profound philosophical question asked by a poet who's influenced me a great deal. His name is George Seferis. He won the 1963 Nobel Prize for Literature. Writing about an ancient conflict in Cyprus, he asked, "Who can change the attitude of those with power? Who can make himself heard? Each dreams separately without hearing anyone else's nightmare." I truly believe it's within us to reflect profoundly on this question, to find answers to this question, to find solutions, and to take us forward. If we don't make the change, who will? If we, the privileged, if we, the owners of the addictive fossil fuel that 120 years after the development of the internal combustion engine has become the addiction and choice of the globe, who will do it? We ourselves can. Remember, we are all genetically brothers and sisters under the skin. We are companions and friends on this biospheric journey. And we know that there is no us, there is no them. There is only us. As we have heard from so many speakers today, there is one humankind, there is one biosphere, there is only us. And if in the next 30 to 40 years we don't get it right, if we don't find the solutions to climate change mitigation, if we don't find alternatives to a high carbon consumption economy, if we fail to use our high carbon wealth to transform ourselves into a low-carbon future, our whole planet and our biosphere will be in considerable peril. This is a moment for leadership. It's a moment for transformation. It's a moment to rediscover our humanity. So how do I go about this? How do we go about this? How do we share this with the planet? How do we change the minds for our political leaders? Let me offer you something that at the age of 55 is awfully naive and idealistic, and that's just fine by me because I get more idealistic as I age. Please open your heart to the other. Stop thinking about us and them. We are one humankind. We are the stewards of the biosphere on which so many other species thrive. We are responsible for biodiversity and for maintaining the integrity and the health of the planet. Cast off the shackles of fear. That's what restricts us. That's what limits us, fear. We're afraid of what people will say. We're afraid of how people will react. We're afraid of how our ideas will get shot down. Learn to take the sticks. Take Gandhi's lesson about turning the other cheek and persist. After they've called you names and run away, what do they have left? They'll have to listen. So, shun the corrosive embrace of cynicism. The ones who say no. The ones who say no, we can't. The ones who say this is impossible. For a population this small, this rich, this talented, this privileged, no such thing as that. Above all, as Gandhiji taught us, please make truth your guiding light. We all have different definitions of what truth means. I realize, as the philosophers will tell us, there's no such thing as objective truth. But we all know in our hearts what's right and what's true and what's good and what is not. And if we do that, sisters and brothers, we will proclaim the dominion of love. That is the missing ingredient. Unconditional love. Recognizing the humanity and the soul of others. Recognizing that love, affirming it, feeding it, nourishing it. We'll have practical means of getting there, but this has to be the goal. And if we can do that, you, all of you, can indeed be the change you wish to see in the world.